Hey everybody, this is Marty the JavaScript Party, and this is my video for Use It or Lose It. Basically kind of video I don't really like doing because I kind of like to keep my personal opinions about politics to myself mostly, and only because I don't really have any expertise in any of these things. But I am studying to be a paralegal, and the course I'm in right now is for bankruptcy, and I got to read the history of bankruptcy and read sort of the early stuff. Like, so when I was younger and like in engineering school and stuff, I used to always like sort of ex- skip the preface and all the introductory stuff and all that. Now that's the part that I find the most interesting. And so I spent a lot of time reading the history of bankruptcy in my textbook, and reading the sort of opinions of the people in the bankruptcy thing. And so I asked ChatGPT why bankruptcy exists, and I don't ever expect to get a correct answer from ChatGPT. What I expect to get from ChatGPT is sort of the most commonly accepted answer, which is not always correct. Like I can't remember what the quote was, and like so in Hitchhiker's um, Guide, they say it's a very popular thing, and it's actually correct, because generally what the popular thing isn't correct. Here it says bankruptcy exists to provide a legal process for individuals and businesses that can no longer repay their debts. It serves several important functions. Okay, so according to my book, that's not true. The reason bankruptcy exists, first and foremost, is to help people who creditors collect money. That's why it exists. That's the main reason it exists. Um, Now, bankruptcy laws were the reason they were created is a different thing. And according to my book, the reason they were created, and this makes sense, is because basically to try to spur on interstate commerce in the United States. Basically, if you before the latest set of laws came into account, and I'm not sure because there was a new set of laws that were brought in they were enacted in 1978 and implemented in 1979, and then like in 1910 or 19 something like that, there was another set of laws that came in. But before that, there were literally more people in the United States in debtor prison than criminals. More debtors in prison for debts, for not paying debts, than criminals in prison for committing crimes. So like we had come to a situation where like it was just like if you go do business with somebody and you didn't quite understand what was going on, and then something went sideways, you're going to prison, right? So obviously people were very, very careful not to do business with anything that could result in them going to prison. No one wants to go to prison, I don't think. I don't want to make a generality of it, but now before those laws that said, "Hey, if you don't pay your debts, you go to prison," that was actually an improvement. That was a massive improvement because before those laws came in, and it actually took a few iterations to get there, but before that came in, if you didn't pay your debts, you became a server. You became ownership. The person that you owed, now all you have left is you. Well, now they own you. So you basically became a slave. So we went from like sort of, hey, if you loan someone money and they don't pay you back, then you get to own them. To, okay, this slavery thing isn't working out. Now they're going to go to prison. We still want people to pay their bills, but now they're going to go to prison. And then it got to a point where they were like, oh man, this is really preventing people from taking risks. This is really preventing entrepreneurship. It's preventing any forward motion in society. So we need to make it to where you don't go to prison or that, but we got to come up with some way to get these people their money back and all that. So that is kind of like my understanding of the arc of how we got to where we're at right now. Is we don't we want people to be able to do, we want society, we want progress to be able to happen, but when progress, but as we progress, every time there's a new change in technology or a new change innovation, there's winners and losers. We don't want all the losers to either go to prison or end up in as slaves. So we came up with these bankruptcy laws, and that's why we're here today with the way things are now. Throughout all of history of all bankruptcy laws that ever existed, there's sort of two sides of it, right? There's the debtor side and the creditor side. There's only ever from the creditors half, there's only been one goal, and that's to get their money back for them. But on the other side, it sort of toggles. Sometimes the goal is to get the debtor to pay, and sometimes it's to get the debtor off the hook. And they sort of toggle back and forth and all that. And this has gone throughout history, and it's just sort of we can't quite figure out how exactly we want this to go. But we're sort of in. So as of like 2018, 2019, we got a little bit more into the focus of getting them to pay, figuring out ways to get them to pay, taking away exclusions and things like that that would keep them, creating kinds of loans that people can't get out of. Like student loans is probably the big example. And student loans are just, in my opinion, now at my age, I had some student loans and I paid them, and I paid them off. And then my wife had student loans, and we paid those off. And honestly, in both cases, the only reason we knew we were paying off our student loan is because it was like, wait, why is my bill less than it usually is? And it was because it was the last bill. So we paid for decades and decades and decades. And I think what happens with most student loans, from what I can read, I don't know that there's any official statistics on this, but basically the impression I get is that most people default on student loans, and then they don't pay. And after 7 years, it quits getting reported. And then when they go on Social Security, it comes out of their Social Security. I think that's the typical arc. So when you're and so so basically you're 18 years old, from 18 to 22, you take out $100,000 in student loans. You pay on it for a few years. Something happens to you and you don't have to pay it. You can't pay on it. You default. Then 7 years later, it's not showing up on your credit anymore, so you don't worry about it. You go through the rest of your life, and then when you go to Social Security, they start taking that money out of your Social Security. I think that is the typical way that works, and I think that's horrible. I think that's absolutely horrible. So they basically wait until you're vulnerable, and then so they take you at your most vulnerable point early on life, which is when you're 18 years old, and then they punish the hell out of you when you're at the most vulnerable point of your at the end of your life. Basically, that's seems to be the whole point, and that just seems like insanely evil. And the reason it's really really bad is because I think that easy student loan money is what fueled the massive increase in uh, in university costs, because it just increased demand, basically. So anybody who did want to pay their way through didn't couldn't because the price went up, and the reason the price went up is because a bunch of people were on student loans. So I think that most people don't realize that they are ruining the back end of their life by taking student loans out at the front end of their life, and that is a bummer. That's a real bummer, and it's a shame. It's a damn shame. So, anyways, bankruptcy has to exist. If we don't have bankruptcy, um, like I could see us trying to wiggle our way back out where like it becomes a little bit more creditor friendly and less consumer friendly. But it's just like, for me, the best example I can think of is just like, why do we have a stop sign on the road? Like if you're in the middle of nowhere, like say, imagine you're on a very, very flat place in the desert. It's flat. You could see for miles in any direction, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're the only one driving. There's absolutely no point to having a stop sign there. And so if you run that stop sign, yeah, you're doing a violation. And that probably describes the vast majority of bankruptcies today, or that I've ever been around. Um, it's just like somebody, I don't know. Usually they get themselves in a bad spot. Usually it's because they're, they sort of, they're in a good spot, and then they sort of leverage themselves all the way to the limit, and then something happens in their personal life and they're no longer able to afford to pay all that stuff. And then normally they do something crazy like go on a big cruise or something fun, and then they file bankruptcy, and then they deal with that for however they deal with it. So that's the sort of the most, and I think that is the 2 o'clock in the morning, just blowing by in the middle of the desert, um, blowing by the stop sign. Now sometimes what happens is you might have like a dirty cop or something, or maybe some kind of bad authority figure, or possibly, yeah, probably an authority figure, and they're like, they know that you're blowing through at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not hurting anybody. It's just like whatever, no big deal. Like they shouldn't have given you all that leverage anyways to begin with. So it's just sort of the nature. Like there's definitely enough information about everybody that you should be able to determine if somebody's a, a good reliable payer, or if they're not a reliable payer, and then you should be able to give debts accordingly. And giving massive debts to 18-year-olds right out of high school, clearly a bad idea. So anyway, so most of the time, but some cop may hide there and be like, "Ooh, I'm going to take advantage of them. I'm going to give them that they're going to blow this stop sign. They're going to be speeding. I'm going to pull them over, and then I'm going to get them. I'm going to have control over these people." Like they're going to abuse their authority with that. And I think that's kind of where we are right now. And only because like technology changed. It is easier for creditors to give a fair evaluation. And when they are giving debts to people who can't afford to pay those debts, they are doing that on purpose because a more they have a desire to do something that they really shouldn't be doing. They're using it in a predatory way. They're not being good people. They're not trying to do anything. They're taking advantage. And yeah, so but the reason the bankruptcies exist is because, like, let's say we're having a technology growth, right? And we move from, like, say, VCRs to DVDs. And now there's all these advantages to DVDs over VCRs. Now everybody who has VCR, all these VCR sorts of people that are dependent on VCRs, um, all those people are like out of work. So if we didn't have bankruptcy laws, all those owners, all those people that bought into the VCR thing, they're slaves now. They become slaves. So what happens is nobody wants to do anything because they don't want to take a chance. Everybody wants to be self. They want to be able to, buy a little farm with a few acres, grow their own food. They want to be completely self-sufficient so that they don't have to risk going to prison, and that causes like the entire system just to crumble. Um, and that is why we have it there. So like when there's some change and it causes a massive number of people to suddenly find themselves no longer relevant in the existing thing, in the existing system, they aren't fighting for their very lives. So that's what that's all about. And I do think that because of technology and because of the way things are, um, we should put a little more onus on the lender. And I do think that, like, while we have credit scores, I think every lender should have to say they should have some sort of score that indicates what the outcomes of their loans normally are. So, like, if you go to a pawn shop and basically everybody that they ever give a loan to ends up having some horrible, horrible outcome, you should see that. You should say, hey, 9 out of 10 people that take a loan out from me are dead in a year, right? It's like you should be able to see that. We should have, lenders should get a lender score, and we should see that, and these lender scores should be public. Um, so it should be very, very clear when a lender is a predatory lender that does things that causes people to have outcomes. Like we don't know. I've never heard any statistic about what happens to people that get $50,000 in student loans their freshman year of of college. Like I don't know. I don't know. I suspect 9 out of 10 of them end up having a horrible life because of that decision. But we don't know. It's completely obscured from us, and there's no reason that information exists. That information should be out there. Um, so I do think that maybe I guess I'm comfortable with the way how things are right now on the debtor side. It kind of sucks, like it's very, very difficult for a debtor to get out of a lot of things and all that. And I think they may have hit the right spot where like your life isn't completely ruined, but like you can get started, you can get a fresh start, you can get life going again. But it's not pleasant at all, and it's probably something you don't want to do more than one time. But I think on the creditor side, there definitely needs to be some sort of punishment for giving out bad loans regularly. If every loan you give out is bad, you're a predator. You're a bad person. You're a bad organization, and you should be punished, just like people who don't pay their debts should be are punished. I'm not going to say should be punished, but are punished. People who give out bad debts regularly should be punished. Um, and yeah, because I do think that basically they're predators. But anyways, that's just my opinion. Definitely am someone who has a week of studying paralegal in bankruptcy. So take my opinions as just that, the opinions of somebody who knows almost nothing about the subject that I'm speaking on. But I am speaking on it because it's important that we talk about things that maybe authority figures or people that loan money, big banks don't want us talking about, because if we don't, we'll lose that right. See y'all later. Happy coding, everybody. Bye.